On a cold November morning in Fairhaven, Wickford, a town where everyone knew each other by name, Callum Mercer's truck sat idling in the driveway, engine humming against the silence of dawn. The town, nestled between rolling hills and thick pine forests, prided itself on its tight-knit community, the kind of place where secrets had no place to hide, or so people believed. Callum was a man of routine. Every morning he left for work at exactly 6:30 a.m., grabbing his thermos of black coffee and kissing his wife, Evelyn, on the cheek before stepping out. But that morning was different. His truck never pulled out of the driveway. His front door never opened. And by noon, Callum Mercer had vanished without a trace. At first, no one panicked. Maybe he had taken a day off. Maybe he had gone to clear his head. But by evening, when his phone rang unanswered and his coworkers said he never showed up, whispers started circling. Callum wasn't the type to disappear. He was steady, dependable, the kind of man who kept his word. His wife Evelyn called his best friend Dominic Hale in tears. Dom, who had known Callum since high school, assured her that everything would be fine. But behind his calm words, something flickered in his voice. A hesitation, a crack in the mask. 2 days later, Callum's truck was found abandoned near the edge of Miller's Creek. Its doors locked, keys still in the ignition. There was no sign of a struggle. No blood, no footprints leading away. It was as if he had simply stepped out and vanished into the cold, endless woods. Then, as police began to dig into Callum's life, the illusion of a perfect marriage shattered. A hidden story emerged, one of betrayal, deceit, and a truth so devastating that it could break even the strongest of men. Callum Mercer was the kind of man people trusted. A 38-year-old contractor, he built homes with the same patience and precision that he built his life, steady, reliable, and honest. He wasn't flashy or loud, just a man who worked hard, paid his bills, and came home to his wife every night. He and Evelyn had been married for 12 years, and though they didn't have children, they had built what looked like a solid life together. To outsiders, Callum was a devoted husband, a man who adored his wife. But those who looked closer might have noticed the cracks subtle, but there, the kind that form when love turns into routine and words go unspoken for too long. Evelyn Mercer was beautiful in a way that turned heads but never made waves. She carried herself with grace, always polished, always composed. At 35, she managed the local bookstore, a place filled with dim lighting and the scent of old paper. People liked her. She was warm, friendly, easy to talk to. But there was always something distant about her, as if she was holding back a part of herself. In recent months, that distance had grown, and Callum felt it, even if he couldn't put it into words. He tried to brush it off, blaming long work hours or stress. What he didn't know, what no one knew, was that Evelyn had already crossed a line she could never undo. Dominic "Dom" Hale had been Callum's best friend since high school. He was everything Callum wasn't: charismatic, charming, the guy who could walk into a room and have everyone laughing within minutes. He ran a successful auto repair shop, knew everyone in town, and always had a joke ready. If Callum was the foundation, Dom was the wildfire, unpredictable, magnetic, and impossible to ignore. He was also the man Evelyn had been secretly seeing for the past 6 months. It had started small, harmless conversations, fleeting glances, moments that felt like nothing at first. But as the weeks passed, those moments stretched into something dangerous. Evelyn told herself it wasn't real, that it was just a distraction, that she would stop before it went too far. But she didn't. And neither did Dom. On the surface, life went on as usual. Callum, Evelyn, and Dom still shared drinks on weekends, still laughed over old stories, still pretended everything was the same. But beneath the surface there was tension, thick, suffocating, unspoken. Callum trusted Dom like a brother, never suspecting that the man he confided in was the same one betraying him behind closed doors. By the time Callum vanished, that trust was already shattered. He just didn't know it yet. 3 days after Callum Mercer disappeared, the town of Fairhaven was gripped with unease. It wasn't like him to vanish without a word. His truck had been found abandoned near Miller's Creek, locked, untouched, as if he had simply walked into the woods and never returned. But Callum wasn't the kind of man to leave things unfinished. It was a local fisherman who made the grim discovery. Early that morning, as the mist hovered over the water, he had been setting up near the creek's bend when he noticed something strange. A torn piece of fabric snagged on a branch, swaying with the breeze. Curious, he stepped closer. That's when he saw it. A boot, half buried in the damp earth near the water's edge. His breath caught. At first he thought maybe someone had left it behind, but then he saw more disturbed soil. the faint imprint of something heavy being dragged. The ground was uneven, like someone had struggled there. His gut told him something was wrong. Within the hour, police arrived, combing the area with flashlights and measured steps. Officers followed the faint trail leading away from the creek, deeper into the woods. And then they found him. Callum Mercer lay face down in a shallow ditch, his body stiff from the cold. His jacket was torn, his shirt soaked in dark stains. The back of his head was caved in, dried blood matting his hair. His hands, rough from years of labor, were frozen in an unnatural position. One arm stretched outward as if reaching for something that was no longer there. The first responders exchanged uneasy glances. This wasn't an accident. Someone had done this to him. By the time Evelyn arrived at the scene, her face was pale, lips trembling. She clutched a scarf around her neck as if the cold had only now begun to settle in. Her voice wavered when she asked the officer, "Are you sure it's him?" But the moment she saw the body, something flickered in her eyes. Not just grief, but something else. A hesitation. Dom arrived moments later, rushing through the police tape, demanding answers. His face was tight, his jaw clenched so hard it looked painful. When he saw Callum's body, his hands curled into fists, his breathing ragged. The officers had to hold him back as he cursed, swearing that whoever did this would pay. The town of Fairhaven had seen its share of tragedies, but nothing like this. A man beaten to death and left to rot in the woods. This wasn't just a crime. It was personal, and whoever had done it had wanted Callum to suffer. Detective Nolan Graves stepped out of his unmarked sedan, his boots crunching against the damp earth as he approached the crime scene. A seasoned investigator with over 2 decades in homicide, he had seen enough bodies to know when a murder was personal. And this one? This wasn't a random act of violence. This was rage-controlled, deliberate, and deeply personal. The air was thick with the scent of wet leaves and something faintly metallic blood. Callum Mercer's body had been in the woods for days, but the cold had preserved it just enough. Graves crouched beside him, taking in the details. No defensive wounds, no signs of a struggle nearby. The attack had been quick, precise. The back of Callum's skull was caved in, likely from a blunt object. Someone had hit him hard, more than once. The forensic team moved efficiently around him, marking footprints in the soft ground, bagging anything that seemed out of place. A torn piece of fabric snagged on a branch, a half-buried boot print leading toward the creek. The shallow drag mark suggested Callum had been moved post-mortem, but not far. Whoever killed him hadn't tried to hide the body well. It was almost as if they had wanted him to be found. Graves stood and turned to his team. "Check his pockets." An officer carefully searched Callum's jacket, pulling out his wallet, keys, and a crumpled receipt from a gas station just outside town. Nothing was missing, which ruled out robbery. His phone, however, was gone. Graves made a mental note of that. If Callum had his phone on him when he left home, why wasn't it here now? Evelyn Mercer was the first to give a statement. She stood wrapped in a thick coat, her eyes red and puffy, though not a single tear fell. "He left early that morning," she said, voice trembling. "I thought he was heading to work." "Was anything unusual that day? Did he seem upset?" She shook her head. "No, but he had been acting distant lately, like something was on his mind." Graves studied her for a moment. Something about the way she spoke felt too measured, too careful, like she had rehearsed it. Next was Dominic Hale. He paced back and forth near the police tape, his jaw clenched tight. "When was the last time you saw Callum?" Graves asked. Dom exhaled sharply. "The night before he disappeared. We had a couple of beers at my shop. He seemed fine." "Did he mention anything, seem worried about something?" Dom hesitated. It was only for a second, but Graves caught it. "Not really. He was just tired." Graves nodded, but his instincts were already firing. Something wasn't right. Callum Mercer had been murdered, and the people closest to him were holding back. Now it was just a matter of figuring out why. Detective Graves sat across from Evelyn Mercer in the dimly lit interrogation room, watching her closely. Her hands were folded in her lap, her nails pressing into her skin, but her face remained composed. Too composed. "You were married for 12 years, Graves began, his voice steady. "You knew your husband better than anyone, and yet you say you didn't notice anything unusual before he disappeared?" Evelyn took a slow breath. "Like I said, Callum had been distant. I thought he was stressed about work." Graves leaned forward. "Stressed or suspicious?" For the first time, Evelyn hesitated. A flicker of something fear maybe crossed her face. Graves let the silence stretch. "Evelyn," he said softly, "we know about you and Dominic Hale." Her breath hitched. Her eyes darted up wide, startled but only for a second. Then she composed herself again. "What are you talking about?" Graves slid a photo across the table. Surveillance footage from a motel on the outskirts of town. Evelyn and Dom, standing too close, their hands brushing as they entered a room. The timestamp was 3 weeks before Callum vanished. She stared at it, her fingers twitching slightly. "It's not what it looks like." "Then tell me what it is." She swallowed hard. "It was a mistake, I ended it." "Callum never knew." Graves raised an eyebrow. "We'll see about that." In the next room, Dominic Hale sat slumped in his chair, rubbing his temples. His usual charm was gone, replaced with exhaustion. "You lied to me," Graves said, tossing the motel photo onto the table. Dom exhaled sharply. "Yeah, I lied, but I didn't kill him." "Then who did?" Dom ran a hand down his face. "I don't know, but I swear it wasn't me." Graves wasn't convinced. Neither of them was telling the full truth. The breakthrough came from Callum's missing phone. Investigators tracked its last known location pinging near Dom's auto shop the night before Callum vanished. Then, there were the boot prints near the crime scene, a perfect match to a pair found in Dom's locker at the shop. And finally, the forensic team found something that changed everything. Callum's blood inside Dom's truck. Not a lot, but enough. Evelyn wasn't lying about one thing: she had ended the affair. But what she didn't know was that Callum had already found out. Investigators uncovered an unsent text message on Callum's work laptop, drafted the night before he disappeared. "I know everything. We need to talk. Meet me at Miller's Creek." It was addressed to Dom. Graves exhaled. The pieces were coming together. Callum had confronted Dom that night, and somehow it had ended in murder. Now all that was left was getting Dom to confess. Detective Graves stood in the dimly lit interrogation room, his patience wearing thin. Dominic Hale sat across from him, his arms crossed, jaw clenched, but the weight of the evidence was crushing him. The blood in his truck, the unsent message, the boot prints. He had nowhere left to run. Graves leaned forward. "We know Callum confronted you that night. He knew about you and Evelyn. You met him at Miller's Creek. Something happened. Tell me the truth, Dom." Dom's breathing grew uneven. He tapped his fingers against the table, a nervous tick. "It wasn't supposed to happen like that," he muttered. Graves stayed silent, letting the confession come. Dom exhaled sharply. "Callum called me. Said he knew about Evelyn. Told me to meet him. He was pissed, man. I tried to explain, but he wasn't listening." His voice cracked. "He shoved me. Said he was gonna ruin me. Tell everyone. Make sure I lost everything." Graves watched as Dom clenched his fists. "I lost it. I grabbed the tire iron from my truck and swung. I didn't mean to, I swear. But he just dropped, and I panicked. I dragged him to the woods, left him there. I thought no one would find him so soon." Silence filled the room, heavy and suffocating. "You didn't mean to kill him," Graves said, his voice calm. "But you did." Dom's shoulders slumped. He knew it was over. The trial gripped the town, with every seat in the courtroom filled. The prosecution painted Dom as a jealous man who let rage control him. The defense argued it was a crime of passion, a moment of blind fury. But the evidence was undeniable. The jury deliberated for just 5 hours before reaching a verdict. Guilty of manslaughter. Dominic Hale was sentenced to 18 years in prison. Evelyn sat in the back of the courtroom, her face unreadable. She had lost her husband and her lover, and now she was left alone. The town of Rue Wickford Batteries would never be the same. Callum Mercer had been a respected businessman, a family man. His murder shattered the illusion of quiet, small-town life. Evelyn moved away, unable to face the whispers and stares. Callum's family struggled to make peace with the truth that betrayal, jealousy, and rage had led to his death. And Detective Nolan Graves? He closed another case, but it never got easier. He had learned long ago that love and rage were two sides of the same coin. What do you think about this case? Do you believe Dominic Hale's sentence was fair? Let us know in the comments below. And if you want more gripping true crime stories, be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because sometimes the most shocking crimes happen in the places you least expect.